My name is Jeff Jordan. I'm president and founder of Rescue Agency, and we are the visionary sponsor of this summit, and we're so pleased that you're here in our hometown of San Diego. Rescue is a behavior change marketing agency focused exclusively on positive social change within public health. Speaking of health, I would like to kick off today's conversation by talking a little bit about health equity. How many of you would say that health equity is a part of what you do every single day? Okay. I was hoping to see like 100%. I saw like 80%. Is that because the other 20% is still waking up? Let's try again. Who would say health equity is a part of their work every day? Okay, there we go. So one of the things about health equity is that it's kind of this ambiguous topic. It's like, okay, we are working on health equity. And we know what that means in terms of kind of the grand sense, but then when we get down to the nuts and bolts of it, the question is, well, what does that actually mean when we're talking about health communications, when it talks about the campaigns that we're working on? And health equity is something that we have worked on and we have been asked to work on for all 22 years that Rescue has been around. One of the things that we found to be really helpful is to actually define what does health equity mean in terms of communication. And so in terms of health communications, the way we look at health equity is we say equity is needs-based impact. That means that equity is achieved when every person can attain their full health potential. And so that means that our campaigns that we put out there have to actually be able to create a more equitable world after the campaign is over than before the campaign started, right? So that means that we have to understand who is in greatest need, including historical marginalization, systemic racism, and limited educational and economic opportunities that create the need for more support within certain populations. And the greater someone's need, the more support they should receive from our program, right? So achieving health equity, or at least improving health equity, means that the world is more equitable at the end of our campaign than it was at the beginning of it. Now, okay, we're getting a little bit of clarity there. The question is, why is health equity so difficult, though? Why does it feel almost impossible to actually create movement within that space? Well, I would say that one of the biggest problems that we have with health equity is actually these boxes. These little boxes that lead to graphs and charts, that lead to statistics, that lead to grants and funding requirements, that lead to programs focused on achieving health equity that are not even aware of what the actual inequity is because we started with a box. I would actually say that we are blinded by this box. We're blinded by the false sense of confidence that it gives us, as if we now completely understand a problem based on a small, incomplete piece of information. A piece of information that could be a red herring for the true reasons of why your audience engages in the unhealthy behavior. At best, it's a distraction that prevents us from truly understanding our audience's behaviors. But at worst, it's dangerously wrong, attributing behaviors to correlated characteristics that lead us to create campaigns that can stereotype, judge, and alienate our most vulnerable populations. We're told that the data has been gathered, the inequity has been identified, and now we just need a solution. A solution that fits inside of this box. But just because someone checked this box and that box, what does that actually mean? What does that actually tell us about their life, about who they are, about what led them to the behavior, what keeps them doing it, and what could change them? Not much. The reality is the solution to health equity is not inside this box. As long as we live within these boxes, health inequities will persist because these boxes are grossly understanding inequities. In fact, I believe that these boxes are doing more harm than good because they turn correlations into explanations that oversimplify and misunderstand the unhealthy behaviors that we are actually trying to change. The solution to health equities is actually based on the lived experiences that these boxes represent, and many other characteristics that are not measured by these boxes. And that information lives outside of these boxes. 23 years ago, I was a high school sophomore at volunteering for my local health department's teen tobacco prevention program. Now, I can tell you, I can be honest with you, the reason I did it was for my college application. I did not have a direct connection to tobacco use, thankfully, but it looked cool, it sounded like a good opportunity, and was fun. And so let's take a look back at 17-year-old Jeff here.
Here we are at the Sports Center of Las Vegas at the Kick-Ass Bash version 2, an exposed event sponsored by the Clark County Health District and run by Rescue Productions. Let's go inside so I can show you around.
That was young Jeff, sprucing up that college application. And what we were working on was something called a teen anti-smoking campaign, right? Teens, we were there to reach teens. And so I was a volunteer with a dozen or so other teens from around around Las Vegas, where I'm from. And our goal was to convince other teens not to smoke. And we had this marketing agency, a really popular agency at the time that was working with the Truth Campaign and with all of these other teen tobacco prevention programs. And we were putting together these events and doing all this great stuff. And you know, we did the events, and I was a volunteer for about a year. And I started to look around and say, you know what? None of these kids smoke. None of these kids ever smoked. And I don't think any of them would ever smoke. And so fortunately, I had a really, really cool advisor. She was just a few years older than me. Her name's Maria. And I went up to her and I said, you know, we're not actually talking to the kids who smoke. Like, I know them. Some of them are my friends, and they would never come to this thing. And she agreed. And she was pretty cool herself. And we started to work together. And I went from volunteer to a part-time worker at the health department. And then a year later, when I was a junior, the group needed more work than I could do myself. And I said, well, I've got a friend who could do web design. I've got a friend who could do graphic design. How about you just hire me as a company? And that's how Rescue started. But more importantly, what we recognized was we weren't reaching the people who were at greatest need. Now, at the time, I had no idea what was at risk versus not at risk versus high risk, what was a vulnerable population or not a vulnerable population, what was equity, and that we were actually having a conversation about health equity. All I knew was that we were trying to prevent the behavior of smoking, and we weren't talking to the people who actually needed that message the most. So we started to shift the campaign dramatically. Rather than recruiting teens to just learn about tobacco use, which, you know, teens who smoke don't really want to learn about tobacco use, we started to engage their influencers. We turned the campaign into kind of an alternative, rock-focused program that worked with bands, that went to events, that educated teens where they were rather than trying to bring them to us. And the campaign was hugely successful. Within a few years, Nevada became the state with the third lowest teen tobacco use rate in the nation. Nevada, the state where you can still smoke indoors today, the state where the tobacco industry and the gambling industry have a very, very close relationship, the state with cheap tobacco taxes where Californians go to buy their cigarettes. That state had the third lowest teen tobacco use rate because its biggest city, that represented about 80% of the population, had an amazing teen tobacco prevention program that wasn't just focused on teens, but that was actually focused on the youth who needed the support the most and engaged pretty much every influencer you can imagine that lived in Las Vegas at the time. And what was so powerful about that was that we focused on the lived experience of those teens. Where were they going? What were they doing? Where were they getting that influence that was leading them to make that decision between smoking and not smoking? What was the place where if we inserted our message, we could have the greatest impact in their lives? To do this, we had to understand who they really were. Not their race and ethnicity necessarily, or their income level, or what part of town they lived in, but what's their day-to-day like? Who influences them? What do they value? What do they care about? What do they want their friends to think about them? And how can we make living tobacco-free a part of that identity that they're trying to project onto others? That insight has been a part of Rescue ever since. The idea that we have to understand the lived experience of the people that we are trying to reach. Because in order to truly know who needs more support, we have to understand what is leading people to engage in the at-risk behavior. So when we talk about health equity, our first step is to define who is it that needs that help. And to do that, we have to swallow a very, very hard piece of medicine within public health. And that is that we are not trying to reach everyone. How many of you have ever been in a meeting where someone said, well, we want to reach everyone in the community? Right? This campaign is for everybody. Well, we don't want to leave anybody out. That would be unfair. to the privileged people, right? Equity is not equality. Programs that focus on equality over-deliver to audiences with fewer needs and under-deliver to audiences with higher needs. Why is that? Because when something is equally distributed, from our perspective, it inevitably gets over-distributed to the people who are easiest to reach and under-distributed to the people who are hardest to reach, right? We actually sometimes call them hard to reach, but then we don't put any extra effort into reaching them. We just say this is for everybody. Speaking to everybody, creating messages that are as generic as possible in order for everyone to feel included, are more effective with people who need less support. Why is that? Because people who need less support are more equipped to take advantage of a new piece of information without any additional support. And those who need our help the most are the ones who are most in need of specific, targeted messages that actually help them understand how change can be possible within their lives. And media channels disproportionately cater to people who need less support. Why is that? Because media channels were designed by an industry designed to sell stuff to people with money. And we know that that is one of the biggest influencers of who is going to be healthiest and who is going to need more or less support. Commercial marketing is structurally inequitable. These tools that we rely on for all of our communications, they were designed to be inequitable because inequity is profitable. And it is shamelessly true today. There is no one sitting in a corporate marketing board talking about equity. They are all talking about how do we increase our sales. And you do that by leaving out the people who can't buy your stuff, right? It is literally designed to be inequitable because that is what's profitable. And the problem is that when we go out there and we use those tools, or we use those agencies that are so good at selling those products, we sometimes get blinded by what their best practices are and say, well, this works to sell products. This is how you're supposed to do it. This is how we've done it for decades. But what we don't realize is that what they've done is they've achieved inequitable success over and over again, sometimes creating the very same problems that we are trying to fight with those very same strategies. So a program, in order to actually achieve health equity, it has to be intentional. Because a program that is not intentionally equitable is always unintentionally inequitable. Not because any of you did anything wrong, but because the world is inequitable, because marketing is inequitable, because the media channels we use are inequitable. So without every single step being conscious of equity, we won't achieve that goal of the world being more equitable when our campaign is complete. So how do we do this at Rescue? Now, we started not really knowing that this was what we were doing, just knowing we needed to talk to the right people, the people who needed our help the most. And over the past 22 years, we've used all this expertise and all this insight into create a framework that helps us and all of our team understand how it is that we infuse equity intentionally into every step of what we do. And we call it the Intentional Equity Framework. We could have been more creative with that name, but we just wanted to be clear. It's important. And the Intentional Equity Framework begins by asking who needs the most support, and more importantly, why do they need the most support? What is it about their lifestyle, about the circumstances of their life, about their experience, their community, that increases their need to support? How do we speak to them in a way that caters to the groups that are most in need of that support without necessarily excluding others? I think sometimes we get concerned that just because we are focusing on a specific population that needs our help, that we're somehow leaving everyone else out. It's like, no, our campaigns are always open to whoever wants to see them. Our websites are free to everybody. If you are watching those same channels, you are welcome to see those messages. It's not about excluding. It's about emphasizing. It's about focusing on the people who need your help the most. And how do we ensure our messages are delivered more frequently to those that need those messages most? To do this, we have three pillars within the Intentional Equity Framework. The first one is called applied empathy, authentic narratives, and needs-based implementation. Let me talk to you a little bit about how we actually achieve this equity. Applied empathy helps us understand who needs the support the most. Authentic narratives help us speak to the people who are most in need. And needs-based implementation ensures that the people who are most in need receive that support. And what that does is it changes the delivery so that the messages and the media are more greatly delivered to the people who need the support the most, but this is only possible when intentionally pursued. So let's jump in. Applied empathy is incorporating the realities of the audience's path to change into a behavior change program. And this means that we actually have to go from being the people who are providing information to the people that are providing solutions. We have to understand not only why is our audience engaged in the behavior, in the unwanted behavior, or not engaging in the healthy behavior, but we also have to understand what would it realistically look like for them to change within their lifestyle, within their limitations, within the circumstances of their life. Have you ever thought about, whether you're working on nutrition or smoking cessation or drug prevention, what it would look like for a single person in your audience to take your advice? What would they need to do? How would that actually work? What steps would they take? What obstacles would they face? On our campaigns, we sometimes work on individual profiles of people within our audiences in order to actually ideate and visualize what it looks like for that person to change and what would be required for them to change. Because that allows us to figure out, well, how can my campaign not just tell you what to do, but how can my campaign show you and help make this easier for you? What we have to understand is that every single behavior has a function. There's no such thing as a wasted or useless behavior. Whether we're talking about drug use, or smoking, or inactivity, or unhealthy eating, people do these things for their own reasons. And those reasons for them are valid, real reasons. The first thing we have to do is we have to respect those reasons. As hard as it might be to respect why someone might be using a potentially deadly drug, we have to respect that they are not making a mistake. They are making a choice that in their mind was the best choice for the outcomes that they were looking for. And now the question for us is, how can we convince them that they can achieve what they want better with the behavior, with the healthy behavior that we would like them to do? Or how can we show them that what they think they're achieving actually isn't what they're achieving? Not based on our perspective, but based on their own life and their own perspective. Achieving equity requires that we first ask ourselves, which people are most in need and why are they most in need? And what is the most effective pathway for change for those people who need the most support? And finally, how can communications reduce that burdens of change? Your communications should make change easier. If your communication is not helping your audience, then you're just telling your audience what to do. And what do we always say when we talk about vulnerable people, vulnerable populations, people who need support? We say they need help. So shouldn't our campaigns help them rather than tell them? That's where authentic narratives come in. Authentic narratives are how messages show how change can be effectively achieved within people's lives. The first question you have to ask yourself is your message actually helpful? Does it reduce the burden of change for the people most in need within your audience? What can your message realistically achieve? This is one of the most important questions we have to ask ourselves, ideally with the funder in the room, so that they're on board too. But depending on the size of our budget, the size of our campaign, what can we achieve with this? And how many people can we achieve it with? I can't tell you how many campaigns with excellent potential, with the potential to cause real change, weren't effective because they tried to do too much at once. They tried to reach too many people, they stretched their messages too thin, they stretched their media too thin, or they just were overgeneralized and weren't able to reach the right people. And who should share this message? What cues will let people know that this message is for them? The most important part is about making behavior change easier. So what does that look like? First of all, we want to make sure that we're focused on the audience members with greatest need. We don't try to be for everyone. Try to be specific for someone in need. Messages that try to reach everyone end up impacting no one. But messages that are tailored and targeted have an impact on someone. And that's because you focus on what that one person needs. Go deep rather than go broad. And focus on providing relevance before asking for change. A lot of times we forget to let the audience know that we get them. That we have taken the time to understand you and your life and your circumstances, and I am making this recommendation to you based on that understanding of your life, not based on my own perspective. Now, why is it so important that equitable messages are tailored and targeted? When someone is in need, they have obstacles in their life to that change. I can't tell you how many times we've done research with audiences who have shared with us that they actually want to do the healthy behavior that we are sharing, whether it's smoking cessation, exercise, eating healthy. And it wasn't actually that they needed another reminder letting them know that they should do this. They had real obstacles in their way. But what do they see in message after message after message? It's just someone else telling them, giving them another reason why they should do this behavior. And eventually they stop listening because they say, I already know I should do this. I actually want to do this, but I can't. But I can't. And each of them will have their own reasons why they can't. And all they want is a little bit of help. Now, we are the ones actually being paid to do this, right? We are the ones that are spending all day, spending our time trying to figure this out. But so many of our campaigns put the burden of figuring out how to change on the very people that are most in need. We talk about how little time they have, how little resources they have. They have 2 jobs, they have kids, they have this, they have that. And on top of it, I'm going to make you figure out how to quit smoking. I'm going to make you figure out how to eat healthier. I'm going to make you figure out how to stop using drugs. We have the resources to dive into their lives and look for those opportunities for change. In nutrition, we've done a lot of research to understand why certain populations eat healthy and why others don't. And when messages are put out there that simply tell you to eat healthy, tell you to eat more vegetables, more green vegetables, or whatever it might be, well, the people who know how to do that and can do that, feel reinforced. They get that message. But the people who can't do it, the people who have an obstacle say, oh, I don't know how to do that. And so that immediately creates inequity, right? Let's say there was like this new food, this new superfood, right? We all know about superfoods, right? We start hearing about this new superfood, and who are the people who start eating it immediately? Are the people who can. The people with means, the people with time, the people with ability to figure out how to eat it, how to cook it, etc. And who could care less? The people who need it the most, right? And that's because they need additional help to figure out how to do that. But then when you dive in and you actually say, hey, here's a moment in your regular everyday. I know that every day you go home from work, from your second job, and you're looking for a really quick dinner that costs $20 and feeds 4 people. And you usually stop at fast food to get that. But did you know that you could actually stop at the grocery store, and they sell a rotisserie chicken, and they also sell pre-mixed salads, and you can actually buy that rotisserie chicken and that pre-mixed salad and a little French baguette for that same $20 and feed your whole family much more healthy. What's the difference between what I just said and telling you to eat healthier? I just showed you how, right? And not just how, but how based on your life, your specific need of getting a quick meal on your way home from work that feeds 4 people that costs $20. That's what it means to create an equitable message. It means that we took the time to understand where change would realistically fit within our audience's life, and instead of telling them that they should be living better, we show them how they can do it within their life. That's why equitable campaigns are carefully and purposefully tailored and targeted, because it's about them, and it's about helping those in need. Now we might say, wow, we're leaving people out. No, we're not leaving anybody out, because anybody could have that situation happen in their life. It just happens to be that our audience has that situation a lot more and needed that help a lot more. And something that we've heard over and over again in focus groups with really, really specific messages like this is people say, that one probably doesn't apply to me, but it helped me think differently about how I think about my meals. And now I'm thinking of new ideas of how I can solve it, because people don't just learn the exact solution, they learn the way of thinking about their nutrition or whatever behavior it is that you're trying to change. But the most important thing is that we stop trying to be everything to everyone. We stop trying to make our messages as generic as possible, and we target. Why? Because there has never, ever in the history of marketing, of commercial marketing, of public health marketing, ever been a campaign that appeals to everyone. Apple hasn't done it. Nike hasn't done it. McDonald's hasn't done it, right? Think about all the people who hate those brands, right? So those brands with billions and billions of dollars have never been able to make a message that appeals to everyone. All of them have had their targeted audiences. So why is it that we continue to try and make those messages? We say, Nike couldn't do it with their $1 billion, but my $50,000 grant is going to reach everybody in this community. And we're going to create a movement. On Sunday, the entire community is going to march for healthy eating. It's just not possible. It's just not possible. And I know that a lot of that pressure comes from our funders and it comes from our bosses, and we have to educate them too. Because the change they want to achieve actually begins with those targeted messages. So let me just show you a few examples to see how it is that targeted, tailored, equitable messages operate in the real world. We recently launched a new campaign right here in California with California Department of Public Health to educate teens about marijuana use. And let me show you one of those messages.
Life can be a lot sometimes. Weed might seem like a harmless way to deal with stress, but using it in your teens can have the reverse effect. That's because the THC in weed can attach to the receptors in your brain that control fear and anxiety, making it harder to manage stress and anxiety on your own. So while you think your problems are going away, they're actually still waiting for you. Learn how to manage stress without weed at mindovermarijuana.com.
Now, what did we learn when we were putting that campaign together? The first thing we learned was that teens weren't just using marijuana just to use it. I wasn't like, ooh, look, a joint. They were seeking it out for their own personal reasons, a lot of them self-medicating, a lot of them thinking that this was a way to work on their anxiety, their problems. And we said that if all we do is tell them, stop doing it, or hey, it's going to damage your developing brain, well, they weren't really going to listen to us because we weren't really addressing why they were doing it in the first place. So instead, the campaign took a shift to focus more on mental health and to provide those resources to say, hey, we understand that this might be one of the reasons why you're using it. This is why it might actually be doing something different than what you think it's doing, and here's more support. And we couldn't provide all the mental health support in our 30-second ad, but the campaign provides that when they go and seek more information. Let's take a look at another example.
Cheyenne, wake up! I just remember shaking her and she wouldn't wake up. I thought I lost my best friend to an oxy laced with fentanyl, but I just had to snap out of it like, yo, just grab the naloxone.
I used to call her paranoid for keeping it in her purse.
You can't smell fentanyl, you can't taste it, and you can't see it. And it only takes 2 salt-sized grains to kill you.
I don't even want to imagine if I had been alone.
Learn how to protect your friends from a deadly overdose at adoseoftruthil.com.
Drug prevention messages tend to focus on fear and judgment, letting people know that they're doing something wrong and they're doing something that can hurt them. But in reality, people who are using drugs don't feel that way, and when they hear that the person who's talking to them is judging them, well, the last thing they want to do is listen to what they have to say. But there are lives that can be saved if people who are choosing to use drugs actually carry naloxone with them and don't use alone. And so rather than judge and make people feel bad for using drugs, this campaign was focused on the exact moment where naloxone might be needed and show what it looks like to be a good friend. That if this is what's going to be going on in your friend group, in your environment, here's exactly how you can save your friend's life. And again, we looked at what the problem was. The problem was reduce deaths by overdose. And instead of deciding how we would solve the problem, which is, well, then just don't do drugs, right? Instead of looking at that, we looked at their lives and said, you know what? There's going to be circumstances where the drugs are going to be used, and it's going to be very hard to stop those circumstances. But we can still stop the overdose if in that moment someone has naloxone and knows how to use it. And that's the difference between looking at it from our perspective to looking at it from our audience's perspective. Let me show you one last example from our work in Hawaii.
There's nothing you wouldn't do to protect your keiki. You shield them from pain, fear, but what about smoking? The risks you know, heart disease, cancer, scare your keiki too. They see each cigarette as a choice that you make that can take you away from them. Because on average, smokers die 10 years earlier than non-smokers do. End their fear. Quit today with free tools from the Hawaii Tobacco Quitline.
Going back to our focus groups with adult smokers in Hawaii and in other places. A lot of them would tell us, I want to quit, but I'm just too busy. Like, I care about my family. I have to do this for them. I have to do this for them. And I just don't have time to focus on myself, right? So even though I know this might cause cancer, this might be hurting me, everyone else comes first, and I'm putting everyone else ahead of me. And then we asked them, well, what has triggered a quit attempt in the past? And they've told us, one time my kids came home from school and they had just learned about smoking. And my daughter or my son asked me, Dad, are you going to die? Are you going to die because you smoke? And that moment has triggered quit attempts for thousands of smokers. Now, some of them were successful quit attempts, some of them weren't. We know that it takes multiple tries. But our goal in smoking cessation is trigger another quit attempt. And so instead of telling them about the risks that they already knew, we reminded them that there are those people that they sacrifice everything for are actually some of the people most scared for them in their life, trying to recreate this moment that happened in their real life over and over again. And every time we run this ad, it generates more and more calls to the Hawaii Tobacco Quitline. These are just 3 examples of how we can take our message and from taking it from our perspective of what we want to tell people, instead look at their lives and look for those moments for change. Where does the behavior change fit into their life? Where does health fit into their lives? And how can we make our message not something that we're telling them what to do, but something that we're showing them and helping them how to do it? Because that is what health equity looks like. And that's what makes it more likely that at the end of our campaign, we will have a more equitable world than we had at the beginning of the campaign. So I leave you with our 3 pillars of intentional equity: applied empathy and authentic narratives, which we talked about, and needs-based implementation, which you're actually going to hear more about tomorrow. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming all the way to San Diego. Welcome to Agents of Change, and I hope you have an amazing summit.